All of you guys have good points on this issue. But even at the climate summit in Copenhagen, there are deep differences in opinion and view and on how they should solve this issue. There is a somewhat of a deadlock between developing and developed nations. Less developed nations want the developed countries to take primary responsibility for greenhouse gases that were already in the atmosphere, and want the developed countries like EU or the US to take deeper cuts and deeper reductions, while EU and the US want to start the clock at 2009. So many environmentalists have hoped to see more demanding or binding conventions than Kyoto Protocol, but sadly it's unlikely to happen at this year's summit. So I think I'm going to put the discussion to a stop for a minute and talk about a different issue here. Is global warming chiefly caused by humans, or is it a natural phenomenon? Few reputable scientists at this point dispute the claim that humanity has played some role in global warming. Nonetheless, the consensus on this issue is somewhat fragile, with scientists disagreeing on the degree to which global warming might also be caused simply by natural changes in the Earth's climate. Some claim that humans are the chief cause of the global warming that has occurred over roughly the past century, while others, such as Fred Singer, an environmental scientist, and Young-Il Kim, the vice president of the UN Korea Department, claim that our role has been relatively insignificant as compared to natural forces. So the question is, are human greenhouse gas emissions capable of causing global warming?
Okay, thanks, Tay. I just want to start off this discussion by defining what global warming means. As you all know, global warming refers to the global average temperature increase that has been observed over the last 100 years or so. But to many politicians and the public, the term carries the implication that mankind is responsible for that warming. There are many researchers that suggest global warming is mostly natural, and that the climate system is quite insensitive to humanity's greenhouse gas emissions and aerosol pollution. The historical record shows that temperature changes have actually preceded carbon dioxide changes. This is demonstrated on the Vostok graph. It shows that CO2 changes could not actually be primary cause of global warming, or else they would have preceded temperature changes. This evidence would appear to indicate that global warming actually causes changes in CO2 levels. What's notable in this fact is that increase in CO2 levels cannot be wholly attributed to human activities, as much if it is a side effect of natural warming.
Okay, let me add more details onto that. Now, you might be surprised to learn that the amount of warming directly caused by the extra CO2 is, by itself, relatively weak. And it has been calculated theoretically that if there are no other changes in the climate system, a doubling of the atmospheric CO2 concentration would cause less than 1 degree Celsius. And this is not a controversial statement. It is a well understood by climate scientists. And as of 2008, we were about 40% to 45% of the way toward a doubling of atmospheric CO2.
While temperature changes lead CO2 historically, CO2 still causes added temperature change. It is probable that the Sun-Earth interactions that lead to increased temperatures historically, that cause melting of ice and other effects that cause increased CO2 emissions. But these increased CO2 emissions then acted as positive feedback loops in increasing temperature. Nobody disputes that CO2 is a greenhouse gas and has a greenhouse effect on climate. So why would the fact that temperature leads CO2 is the historical record even matter? Is this supposed to indicate that CO2 is not a greenhouse gas? It certainly is and has certainly acted as a positive feedback in the natural historical record.
Okay, well, continuing on from what Jessica was saying. Speaking of history, I think we have to keep in mind a few things here. Humans have increased significantly the number of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, adding substantially to the greenhouse effect. Levels of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere have increased substantially through the Industrial Revolution. Sources cite that humans have contributed roughly 10 to 30% of the greenhouse gases that are currently in the atmosphere since large-scale industrialization began around 150 years ago. This substantial increase due to humans is certainly capable of producing the global warming effects we are seeing today. One of the reasons that the Earth's atmosphere is so vulnerable to such a substantial increase in atmospheric greenhouse gases is that it is so thin.
Okay, I cannot really say I agree with you on this, because humans are a small source of CO2 emissions into the atmosphere. And according to many different sources, humans produce only a single-digit percentages of all the CO2 that is released into the atmosphere every year. And even volcanoes produce more than humans each year. This makes it impossible that humans are the main cause of global warming, even if we take greenhouse gases to be the main driver of the global warming.
Okay, in addition, non-human water vapor is a primary driver of the greenhouse gas effect. Water vapor is the most potent greenhouse gas. It has had a major impact on global warming, and as natural global warming occurs and more ice melts, more water vapor enters the atmosphere, a feedback loop that adds to the natural acceleration of global warming.
Indeed.
I don't think water vapors have a forcing effect on climate change like human greenhouse gases. While water is the most prominent greenhouse gas, it does not have a forcing effect on climate change. The reason why I said that water is forcing is because of relatively short residence time for water in the atmosphere, which is around 10 days.
Please allow me to make contradictions on your argument that you just made. Believe it or not, very little research has ever been funded to search for natural mechanisms of warming, and it has simply been assumed that global warming is man-made. This assumption is rather easy for scientists since we do not have enough accurate global data for a long enough period of time to see whether there are natural warming mechanisms at work. Even cows cause 5 times greenhouse gases than humans, and only 0.03% of the Earth's atmosphere is CO2. And obviously, natural water vapor is a bigger greenhouse gas than CO2.
You've mentioned the possible implication of the term global warming referring to mankind's sole responsibility for this warming. We have never said that mankind is solely responsible for this warming effect. Our main point is that mankind is to blame for a lot of this warming effect, and that a cap and trade system is better than a carbon tax at reducing carbon emissions.
Okay, if I may, some people say that the media is representing the scientific consensus that humans are the primary cause of global warming in the modern era. Others say that media is biased and that there is no legitimate arguments against the resolution that climate change is chiefly human caused. In addition, it's maybe because a new generation of environmental journalists has emerged whose jobs solely depend on the existence of the global warming crisis. Many of the views have been proved wrong time and again. We were assured, you may remember, by the consensus of scientists in Britain during the BSE, the mad cow disease, alarmed that by now as much as a third of the British population would be dead from eating contaminated hamburgers. So the mad cow apocalypse singularly failed to materialize. So think about it.